Hi, I'm Verity Darke. I'm a PhD student from the University of Reading and I'm also the BSHS's Engagement Fellow.
And I'm Dr. Rhys Grant, and I am the Education and Public Engagement Officer here at the Linnean Society in London.
Today we're going to talk to you about our collaborative project between the BSHS and the Linnean Society, which is Unnatural Histories, Classification Through the Ages.
So to begin our paper today, I'd just like to introduce you to what the Linnean Society is and what we do. So the Linnean Society of London is the world's oldest active biological society, and it was founded in 1788 by Edward Smith, who took our name from the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus. Now I'm sure you're all aware that Linnaeus is famous for developing the system of binomial nomenclature that we still use today for naming and classifying various different organisms. So today, the Society's main purpose is to be a central role, or to play even a central role, in the documentation of the world's flora and fauna. And to do this, our members and our fellows come from all walks of life. So we have professional scientists, all the way down to amateur naturalists just with a keen interest in natural history. So we also house a number of historical collections, so these encompass botany, zoology and various library collections from eminent scientists such as Linnaeus, Smith, Darwin and Wallace. So for example, we have over 30,000 botanical specimens, over 4,000 Linnean letters, we have the first artificially cultured pearls ever made, we have Wallace's personal field notebooks, and we also have a number of Darwin's own books that he's annotated. And hopefully you'll get to see some of these historical items later on in this video. So the Society is really quite unique in that it embraces the entire sweep of natural history, but it also promotes the study of key aspects of the biological sciences. So we have a particular emphasis on evolution, taxonomy, classification and sustainability. And this is really what Linnean Learning do as the educational team within the Linnean Society of London. So firstly, what we do is we produce educational resources to assist with teaching the biological sciences, and these range from resources from primary level all the way up to university level. So this includes things like practical sessions, worksheets, primary school loan kits, educational videos, and even complete A-level modules for teaching topics such as adaptation, phylogeny, and genetics. Then secondly, what Linnean Learning do is that we're hugely active in science outreach and public engagement, so we're often exhibiting at science festivals to get members of the public of all ages hands-on with different scientific methodologies and techniques. And this is something that we really enjoy doing, and this actually formed the basis of Verity's project.
So straight off the bat, I would absolutely encourage anybody thinking about applying for one of these fellowships when they come up again next year to go for it. The process is really straightforward. I found it very simple because the Linnean Society and the BSHS advertise these positions online, and there are a list of eligible and desirable criteria, so it's very clear whether you are an appropriate candidate or not. I'm particularly passionate about outreach and engagement, and was fortunate that a lot of my previous experience was in engagement type projects, ranging from teaching in schools to exhibitions to social media type exhibitions. But putting together a science festival exhibition seemed to me a really unique and interesting opportunity for a humanities student, and also seemed like a really great way of talking about how historical science could still be really relevant to scientists today. So for the parameters of the project, I was fortunate enough to work for a month on the project envisioned between the Linnean Society and the BSHS, which was classification through the ages. In my role as an engagement fellow, I got to spend 2 weeks in the Linnean Society's incredible historic archives to research the kinds of stories that might tell the story of Linnaeus' taxonomies and how they changed how we see natural history. So my first experiences in the Society were really awesome. First of all, the Linnean Society's headquarters in Burlington Square are stunning, and you absolutely should come along and have a look. Anybody is welcome to use these resources, you just have to get in contact first and book an appointment. So the Linnean Society is in the same square as in Piccadilly as the Royal Academy, the Geological Society, the Royal Astronomical Society, the Society of Antiquaries of London, and the Royal Society of Chemistry, so you are in some awesome company. When you go through the gates, the Linnean Society stands to your left and is next to the first red telephone box, which was designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, who many people will be familiar with as the architect of the Battersea Power Station, and what I think is also maybe one of the last surviving wooden post boxes. So you're really nicely embedded in this history of science and technology before you even enter the Linnean Society's headquarters. The friendliness and inclusiveness of the staff was absolutely fantastic. There was no gatekeeping, none of these kind of defensive behaviours around the archive. Everybody brought a real genuine keenness to work on the project. This is actually one of the areas where I felt like this work was somewhat different to some of my academic work, which is very solitary. It was an absolute delight to work with a team, which isn't something you necessarily get to do a hell of a lot in the humanities. And the guidance of the expertise of the library team meant that I could make the most of the first 2 weeks of research. My impression of the Science Society's holdings, as you might gather from what Reese has just said, it was kind of one of awe. I'd done some digging through the online catalogue before I started the project, so I had some ideas about the directions in which I might start to take the project, but I also very fortunately had the insight of the library team, who were able to bring some of the most exciting and unusual treasures to my attention and to orientate me in the Society's headquarters, and they're going to do the same for you guys too. This is Isabelle Chamantier from the Linnean Society's library, and she is going to give you some sense of the immense scope of the materials that I was working through for the BSHS project, and pick out some real gems for us to have a little look at.
So I got out a range of material that will highlight the type of collections we have that might be interesting for historians of science in particular. We have in our collections, and I'll talk about the manuscript, Linda will talk about the books, especially downstairs. But the types of archives we have are scientific archives, so research manuscripts, like lists of plans, for example. They all date back from the 1750s, and mostly our collections focus on the 18th, 19th century, but we do have also 20th century, more contemporary archives that we are currently in the process of cataloguing. One of the highlights are the research manuscript by Alfred Russel Wallace. This particular one is the one about the plants of the Amazon, but we have a lot of his manuscripts concerning his travels through Asia as well. So list of plants, a lot of botany, a lot of zoology as well. We also have a section devoted to the society papers, so papers that were read at the meetings of the society, and that includes often the manuscript, like here, but also the illustrations that were then engraved and published along with the paper in the Linnean Society proceedings or journals. This one is particularly nice because it illustrates the Mora tree of Guyana, and is one of the first illustration. It was a paper read in 1838, and it's one of the first paper to picture indigenous people within their environment. So it doesn't solely focus on the species of plant on its own as a an individual thing, but it puts it in context, and you find that a bit with Wallace as well. We also have travel diaries, journals. So this one here is Swainson's journey through the lakes, for example. I particularly like the little drawing of Swainson walking through the lakes. But they focus not only on England and the UK, but they're wide-ranging, so South America, Asia, etc. We have an extensive collection of correspondence which really shows the network of naturalists, especially for the 18th, 19th century. So, for example, this is the Smith correspondence, and that's all online. It's all been digitized. But we also have the correspondence of William Swainson, Richard Pulteney. This is a letter from Banks to Smith. So, important documents to have that really inform about these networks of natural historians in the 18th, 19th century. And we also have letters that document the more domestic history of the Linnean Society, like a lot of loose letters or bound letters are more of individual importance. And then finally, on the other table, we have quite an extensive collection of artwork related to zoology or botany, especially. The Linnean Society has a prize every year for botanical artists, so it's an important element of our collections. And just a few examples, this is a lady botanist who travelled throughout the world, died in 1950, Emilia Noel, and these are flowers from Kashmir. We have illustrated, annotated books like this one, which is an illustration of Smith Flora Britannica by a fellow of the Society who was called Richard Dreyer. This is early 19th century. And then there's kind of external collections that have come to us, like that of Albert Gunther, who was a keeper of Natural History Museum, late 19th century, and he amassed a huge collection of mostly zoology. He worked on fishes and mollusks, I think. And he assembled these massive collection of very varied artwork in a 39-volume set. And just an example of how varied it is, these are illustrations by the Japanese artist Hiroshige, and we have 17 of his color wood blocks.
This is Linda. She is the librarian here at the Linnean Society, and she took me down to this vault when I first began the project to bring out some really interesting things for me to have a little look at in terms of the Unnatural Histories project. So she's going to run you guys through some of them today.
Right, well, where we started was with Linnaeus's first publication, Systema Naturae, and his inclusion in that of the Paradoxa. These were things he had not got proof of, but he thought they might exist. Things like the hydra, the unicorn, the phoenix, the dragon, that sort of thing. And then we looked through some of the books that he had in his library and found examples of the things that he was listing in his Paradoxa. So we found the hydra here, a seven-headed monster, very fierce, and so on. We also found the phoenix. It's rising from the flames, as in the myth. We have the harpy, which Linnaeus didn't actually mention in his list, and so on. But the griffin is here. And there's also the pelican, which he included in his Paradoxa, probably because he felt that he'd heard this story that the pelican would feed its young on its lifeblood if it had to, and there's a wonderful picture here of the blood dripping down from the bird into the nest where the chicks have just hatched, and so on. This is the Monstrorum Historia by Aldrovandi, and here we have an example of a man with an elephant's head and ears, and so on. We also have again another harpy, very obviously blind harpy with the wild hair and the wings and so on.
So I think, to be honest, I didn't really know what to expect from this collaborative project with BSHS, because my background is as a biochemist, so I'm a hard scientist, and all of my research is done sort of in a laboratory behind a bench. So I've never really spent much time in a library doing research through reading books, and I've also never done a collaborative project with a historian before. So I didn't really know what to expect from working with BSHS, or more specifically with Verity. I think what I wanted from the project, though, was twofold. So firstly, from the Society's perspective, I wanted someone to come in and do some research through our historical collections and archives to pick out things that the public would find really interesting, like the mythical creatures that Verity is going to talk to you about in a bit, and then ultimately use that research to produce a public engagement exhibit to get our archives and our collection items out into the public domain. I think I really needed someone like Verity with her background to come in and do this, because although I can put together a hands-on scientific exhibit, I honestly wouldn't know where to start with looking through such a massive library and so many books to produce a more historical public engagement exhibit. And to be honest, I really don't know how Verity started and on that first day chose which books she was going to research through. Secondly, what I wanted from the project was for the fellow themselves to get a lot out of it. So obviously there's the experience with using our collections and our archives and researching through these items, but also I wanted to give the fellow some opportunities that they perhaps wouldn't have in their normal day-to-day studies or during their PhD. So firstly, we took Verity with us to the Cambridge Science Festival so that she could look around science exhibits and just see what makes a good outreach exhibit or event. So we asked her to make notes on what works well, what doesn't work well, and then she could utilise this information for producing her own public engagement event or exhibit at the end of her project. Then when we were back in the office, we kept on with some training. So we spoke about various different things that you need to do when creating a public-facing event, and we wanted Verity to have experience of every step in that process. And we also put Verity in some new situations. So we got her using Illustrator, which is software that you don't tend to use apparently when you're doing a history or this sort of PhD. She coped, she got through it. And we also got Verity heavily involved in a launch event that we were having at the Society for a new partnership that we've created with the charity OneZoom. And this is a group who've created a single website where you can view the entirety of the Tree of Life and the entirety of evolutionary history on a single web page. So I'm going to plug it. It's onezoom.org/Linnean, and you should definitely check it out because it's just fantastic. So essentially for me, the project was all about complete collaboration. So the Society, the Linnean Society, gains research and a new outreach exhibit that utilises our collections and our archives, but also the fellow gets the opportunity to use our collections and gets to do some hands-on research, but then also gets to experience every step in the process in creating a public-facing event or outreach exhibit.
So for me, the research part of the project absolutely whizzed by. I get the feeling that a lot of people in the room are going to sympathise with this idea that actually, no matter how long you plan out for a research trip, it always goes much more quickly than you expected. For me, I found this 2 weeks particularly challenging because the Society's resources are absolutely vast, and this actually isn't my period of speciality. So although my research does intersect with natural history and with museums and collections and science communication, my actual time period is the 19th century, and in particular anatomical museums. So jumping in with Linnaeus meant familiarising myself with some of the figures and the context of 18th century taxonomy. And that was a bit of a challenge for me, particularly in the short time period that I had available to take the research of the project from start to finish. And it was also very strange as an academic to take the shift of the project from original research in terms of coming up with completely new findings, completely new interpretations, to drawing out really interesting stories from the history of natural history to tell to a broad audience. But that was actually one of the skills that I felt the fellowship really helped me to develop. To kind of follow these threads through from where I found them in the research and to weave together a story that might be compelling to non-specialist, broadly aged, broadly ranged audience. So working through the wider context of historical taxonomy brought me to the Society's amazing collection of bestiaries, medieval bestiaries, depicting pre-Linnaean taxonomy, and these were, unsurprisingly, pretty damn awesome. The project evolved primarily to engage the public with the impact of Linnaean taxonomy by showing how Linnaeus' work helped to implement that shift from much earlier hybrid works which dealt with religion, classical literature, mythology, eyewitness accounts, and are often structured in what might today be considered quite an unscientific way, alphabetically, with hand-drawn illustrations, often of animals that the illustrator had never seen themselves. And bring that into the shift that was occurring across the 18th century, which was for first-hand, slightly more objective scientific observation and systematic ordering. So for example, Conrad Gesner's Historia Animalium includes the seven-headed hydra alongside beasts that we absolutely would consider real animals, like the dog, like the rhino. But of course, with the hydra's inclusion amongst those animals, it very much gives the suggestion that the hydra is a real creature. And even though Gesner does seem kind of dubious about the existence of this creature, he has read about the hydra in other texts, he has got eyewitness accounts from people that he trusts, and therefore it is included in the bestiary. Looking at Linnaeus's Systema Naturae, we can see that he deals with the hydra really pretty differently. Linnaeus had heard that there was a hydra in Hamburg, so he went and investigated it himself. He didn't take those stories at face value, and he absolutely went and made a first-hand scientific observation. And by making that first-hand observation, Linnaeus was able to find out that actually the hydra was made by a skilled taxidermist and was intended to serve a moral and religious purpose to frighten people about the potential upcoming apocalypse, very much the sort of purposes that would be prevalent inside of a bestiary. So Linnaeus' Systema demonstrates these differences. Instead of the composites, the descriptions, the various ordering systems of the bestiaries, Linnaeus' work is actually split into clear tables, delineating these animals by particular attributes. Because the hydra doesn't fit into these categories, Linnaeus is able to evidence that it might actually not exist, and that's actually very nicely represented in the Systema, in the placement of the paradoxa, quite far away from the actual tables in which the rest of the animals are represented, again very different from the bestiary. So using the library's texts to foreground this sort of classificatory change created a really strong framework for the next stage of our project, which was to design and make the exhibition.
So I think when designing a public-facing exhibit, there's three key things that have to be done. And the first of these is to have a single, very, very simple take-home message that's usually no more than a single sentence. So as academics, we often take great interest in the work that we're doing, and we really want to get all of this work out into the public domain. But for the public, that's often quite overloading. So if you've got 5 or 6 different points that you want them to take part in at your event and then go home and memorize, that's just far too much. So I always say when designing these sorts of things that one sentence, one key point that you want all of your audience to walk away with, that's sufficient. So that was the first thing that we really tried to hammer into Verity, was that she's got this huge amount of research, but literally one point is what we want the public to take away with them after her event. The second thing is that it's well known that it's better to show someone something than to just tell them something if you want them to remember this a week down the line or a month down the line. And even better still is to actually have them do the thing that you want them to remember. So we really wanted Verity's public engagement exhibit to be very hands-on. We wanted all of the audience members to actually be doing something to do with classification or to do with the bestiaries or the mythical creatures, and Verity is going to tell you about her activities next. The final thing in designing these exhibits is that you really need depth, and this is just sort of an aesthetic thing. So I think there's nothing worse than when you've got poster boards behind you and then just flat leaflets on a table, because it's just not visually appealing and it's not particularly attractive. So in designing this output, we really wanted to have 3 dimensions on our table. And one of the cool things that we'll be including actually is 3D printed examples of some of the mythical creatures that Verity's included in her research.
So I'm absolutely going to second Reese's advice, which is to boil down the core message or story that you want to tell in an outreach or an engagement project into one sentence. That I found, again, as we mentioned, as an academic, you do so much research, you find so many things that you find personally really interesting. But that kind of advice really helped me to streamline my message and not try and say too much in the space of 3 poster boards, and also to coordinate the activities so that they really fit with the message. So we felt that the simplest core message that we wanted to deliver to our audience was simply that Linnaeus' classificatory system changed how natural history was understood. We might try and illuminate additional sort of concepts like that classification isn't static, or that monsters are a matter of perspective, and that science was moving away from this sort of storytelling and hybrid text cutting together to first-hand observation and processes. But if anybody took those messages away, then so much the better. That wasn't our core aim. So I think that for academics, we spend a lot of time problematizing and trying to find the nitty-gritty details and the sort of nuances of everything we look at. And it was quite a challenge to simplify while retaining some of these nuances that we wanted to convey. So we have, for the exhibit, 3 large poster boards retaining the basic information that we wanted to convey. The first poster board explains what a bestiary is. The second explains who Carl Linnaeus is and what actually the hell is his systema. And then there's a final poster board in which we took some of the animals from the bestiary and some of the animals in Linnaeus' Paradoxa, the same animals, and looked at how they were dealt with differently to convey how Linnaeus' system changed that perspective. When I started to write the posters, I kind of approached it like I might have with a chapter or an article, but it became apparent very, very quickly that this is going to be too much information for a poster board, and basically the poster boards became much more bare bones in terms of the text, and we conveyed a lot of information through the images from the Linnean Society's archives. But I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much nuance we were actually able to retain by using activities to show how Linnaeus' work changed how we understood natural history. So as a literary historicist scholar, I was really pleased that we could put out a reproduction of Linnaeus' Systema on the table, with an English translation of the Paradoxa on the reverse, as this meant that anybody who was interested enough to come over to our exhibit after seeing the storyboards and after seeing the other stuff on our table could still get to grips with the core material that we actually worked with. And it still evidenced our main point, which was that even in terms of looking at the objects, you could see a massive shift in classification. Our main activity was postcards to Linnaeus, which was where visitors were given small postcard-sized pieces of paper on which they could draw an animal. It could be a real animal or an imaginary animal, and then send it to the Linnean Society for a 2-word binomial classification, to sort of emphasize this idea that in the 18th century, scientists communicated by this republic of letters. They didn't necessarily know how to express or explain what they were discussing, and therefore language, classification, and so on really helped people to know exactly which animals they were talking about. We're also going to have a Monsters of Nature photography competition. Watch out for it on the Linnean's Twitter, and of course if you come to the exhibit as well. We're hoping that people are going to take photographs of things that are natural but look monstrous, to kind of draw out this concept that actually a lot of these ideas of monstrosity are ones of perception, and that classification shifted away from this idea of monsters being supernatural and into monsters being more natural. We have freebies on the table. We're going to have Monster Munch out, so if you love Monster Munch, do come along to the exhibit for a free bag. But the concept was that you could vote for what you thought the actual crisp, the Monster Munch crisp, is supposed to represent. Is it supposed to represent a monster? Are the little lines coming off of the centre of the crisp's arms and legs? Or is the crisp a monster's footprint? This is the concept of this was not just that Monster Munch are delicious and weird, but also that classification is a matter of perspective, and actually systematizing these kind of things helps to decide what is accurate and what is kind of scientifically within the realms of truth. We also had temporary printed tattoos, which are really fun. I mean, like, who doesn't love a temporary tattoo? I love a temporary tattoo. But the idea of that is, it's true. The idea of that was to convey the fact that many, again, of these stories before Linnean classification were indeed stories. They were eyewitness accounts, but they weren't necessarily verified, and they were kind of filtered through multiple and non-scientific perspectives. So a sailor might see, say, a mermaid, and through the description of what they perceived to be a mermaid, the tattooist might create an image. That image would travel, or perhaps indeed make it into some of these descriptions. So for the outcomes of our project, we had a couple of really interesting ones. I got to write an article for the Linnean Society's magazine, Pulse, which is going to be coming out quite soon, so do look out for it. And of course, we also put together this exhibit.
So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to BSHS for giving us the opportunity to host Verity. I think the project has been a huge success, and I really hope it continues next year, because if we're allowed to, we'd be very grateful to host another fellow. Thank you very much to everybody for coming to our paper and for listening to us talk. So if you are interested in the Linnean Society, please follow us on Twitter @Linnean Society. Our website is www.linnean.org. And if you're particularly interested in our educational outputs or our public engagement outreach work, then please follow Linnean Learning @Linnean Learning. Thank you very much.
Oh, and come and see the exhibit.
Oh yeah, Saturday the 16th of September at the Linnean Society headquarters in Piccadilly.